Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. We still got a few people coming in. I'm just going to kind of stall here a little bit for another minute or two before we get started. Um, a couple things, just housekeeping things. We do record these. We find them very useful, especially for people that aren't able to attend but are very interested in what we're doing. Plus, it does provide a really kind of good record for the conversation. Um, so I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of that. The other part of it is this was originally described as a small group technical discussion. We now have at least 20 people, maybe 25. So we're not going to do introductions. The speakers will be introduced, obviously, because they're going to be presenting, but when we get around to the discussion, if the first time you weigh in and offer some comments, if you could identify yourself, that would be great. But we have a lot of folks here, and which is fantastic. But I think by the time we went around the room and did introductions, we'd be 10 or 15 minutes into our 2 hours. The other thing I want to just mention is for those of you that have been following the work of the ASCE NOAA Task Force for the last 5 years, you know that we've had a large number of meetings, a large number of discussions, primarily focused around how to leverage federal climate science, especially NOAA climate science, in the ASCE standards and manuals of practice. Um, if But what has been lacking is the direct peer-to-peer conversations between relevant NOAA programs and those of you that are actively involved in authoring standards and manuals of practice. Many of you have been at various meetings and you've talked in generalities about the group, various groups, et cetera. But what this is really trying to do is establish communication so that as you go into the next version, the next cycle of a standard, or to create a new manual of practice, we have linkages so that NOAA understands how they might be able to support your efforts. So it's a very kind of open-ended conversation. We're going to start with the engineering need. That's really kind of the way this whole process has been structured. So we're giving each authoring team 10 minutes to just do a real quick, what is the purpose of the standard? How are you kind of doing it now? What do you see as areas where additional technical support from NOAA or one of the other federal agencies would be beneficial? But the idea is this is the beginning of the conversations, not the end of the conversation. So if you're not fully satisfied at the end of the 2 hours today, that's okay. We're going to be having hopefully a lot of these conversations. The main goal is to really begin that introduction, get a sense of what the major issues might be, let NOAA think about and digest some of it. So in some instances, NOAA may be able to say right away, hey, we're working on this, or were you aware of that? Or in other instances, it's just going to be, we're going to need to do some follow-up. But this is a process. NOAA is I think, very committed to trying to support us as much as possible. What that means is kind of remains to be seen. So with that, I just want to give Bilal a real quick chance. He's one of the other co-chairs of the ASCE NOAA Task Force. And then if Amanda's on, I'll let her offer any thoughts. She is the NOAA co-chair to the task force. So Bilal, anything quick?
Yes, thank you, Dan. The only thing I'll add, we followed in the task force a process we called it user to user, and this is really we are bringing both ends. The needs are from those ASC documents, but we'd like to bring them to basically inform them through the NOAA resources that are available to us, which is what Dan stated. But I just want to bring this in that this was it is an important link. And thank you for being with us.
All right, thanks, Bilal. Amanda, are you on? I can't
Hi,
see
Dan.
everybody.
Yep, I'm here, Dan.
Okay,
Hi,
excellent.
everyone. Just also thanking you for joining today. NOAA at the highest levels is committed to trying to see what we can do to protect public safety and keep our critical infrastructure like now and in the future in good shape. So we really appreciate you all being as transparent with us and as clear about what your very specific needs are so that we can hopefully help try to meet them and even possibly bring in some of our federal partners and other agencies to support where it may not be NOAA, but another agency that's coming in. So just wanted to add that piece that even though this is a NOAA ASCE partnership, we're working with other agencies as well. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Amanda. All right, so with that, we're going to jump into the agenda.
Oh, Dan, if I
Go
may,
ahead, Bilal.
I'd like everybody to take advantage of the message on the Zoom meeting. I'll be monitoring that. So if there is any relevant links, information, thoughts that you'd like to put in there, I'll be tracking those. Thank you.
Right, in the chat. That's what you're
In the
saying.
chat.
All
Yeah.
right, excellent. But I will say this, a lot of times we wind up with two parallel conversations. One is live, and the other one is through the chat. So, if you want to contribute something, don't feel like you need to stick just to drop something in the chat. This is intended to be interactive, so we want to keep it interactive. All right, with that, then we have a little bit of fat, so to speak, here at the beginning of the agenda, just to kind of make sure that we have enough time at the end. So what I wanted to do was, with this first little discussion that Amanda and I are having, we really want to talk about two, I think, important discussions that took place over the last couple years. The one was part of a workshop that we had in 2024, where we looked at use cases across 6 different environmental hazards. That all of that work is summarized in an ASCE NOAA technical memorandum. If you've not seen that document, we can make sure you've got it. I cited it in a couple different emails. Um, we identified as many as 250 unique engineering use cases that could benefit from weather or climate data. But what we found subsequent to that in our conversations with NOAA is we need a little bit deeper dive. And that's where the genesis of this meeting came from, because as many of you know, the only individuals that can really speak to the needs of an individual guidance document, and by guidance document, I mean both ASCE standards and manuals of practice, is the authoring committee. These standards in particular are generally developed through an ANSI process. That means they're balloted. That adds a little bit additional complexity, because until the final document successfully clears the balloting process, the methodologies that are expressed in that guidance document can change. And so that's why we've brought in an additional group of people into this conversation that are directly involved in the development of these guidance documents. We feel like that's the best way to help NOAA and the other federal partners understand what we need. And it's also the best way for you to anticipate how maybe forthcoming data or data products could modify the methodology that you would consider in the next cycle. All right. So that's really where we kind of are today. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go past what I thought was still a pretty deep dive in 2024, but be much more specific here at the pointy end of the stick, if I can use that euphemism. And this is in part as a request for NOAA, so that NOAA can speak to its programmatic goals, et cetera, and think about how to help meet your needs. The other meeting that I want to talk about just real briefly, and then I'm going to have Amanda expand on it a little bit, is there was a meeting last week in Asheville where many key programs and line offices within NOAA got together to talk about developing projection services going forward, projection services in particular. So we're talking about how to use existing observational data and model output, et cetera, to characterize future conditions on a variety of timescales. That meeting was very informative. It was really intended to be, I think, largely an internal NOAA discussion of how NOAA might develop this. But Bilal and I were there as ASCE representatives, along with Brian Parsons and Ruth Hawker from EWRI, to represent the ASCE user community, so to speak.
So my name is Matt Gilbertson. I'm a structural engineer with a company called Simpson, Gilbertson Hager, but I participate in 3 committees, and we're lumping kind of the content of those 3 together because they're so closely linked. So I'm going to give an overview of ASC 7 and ASC 24. Not really distinguishing too much between the 2 as I go through because they're really tied together. But there's a 3rd committee within ASC 7. Well, actually 2 committees in ASC 7. Flood loads, which is the primary one we're talking about, but also a new chapter for this next cycle called Chapter 36 on future conditions, which I'm part of too. So that's why I'm in all 3 of them. That's why I'm talking here. But we've got a few other members of the committees on the call here. So any of you folks, feel free to jump in and add if I leave something out you think I missed. So I just want to give a quick overview of how this works. So this might be old news or obvious to some folks, but I just want to make sure we're talking all the same language. So just kind of how the building codes and how these standards get adopted. So you're always going to have, or very frequently going to have, a state or local building code. And very frequently that's going to point to the international building code, some addition of the international building code. Maybe they make some amendments, maybe they don't. And that standard or that code doesn't have too much specific about flood, but it points to ASC standards, which all the nuts and bolts of flood design are in. ASC 7, which is minimum design loads and criteria for buildings and structures. So it has live loads, dead loads, seismic loads, and it also has in Chapter 5 flood loads. So all the loads we actually apply to buildings and structures during design. And then ASC 24 is another standard for flood resistant design and construction that has everything else, anything that's beyond the loads we apply to the building, strict criteria for how we dry flood proof or floor elevations or foundation requirements, MEP requirements, all sorts of stuff in there. And they go hand in hand. So I'm going to talk about kind of this in general terms, but understand if I'm talking about loads, it's an ASC 7. And if it's about and something else related to flood design, that's an ASC 24. So just to kind of give you a picture of where these things sit right now, the latest published editions of these 2 standards, which are not yet in effect anywhere, but will be adopted in the 2027 IBC, and then thereafter adopted at state and local levels in 2028, 2029, or 2039, who knows. Though that has ASC 722 supplement 2, which is the latest and greatest version of Chapter 5 for the flood loads, and the 2024 edition of ASC 24. It's kind of named ASC 2424, but the second 24 is for the year it was published. Those 2 standards were underwent major updates in the last 3 or 4 years. Everything I talk about here is going to be what's in those versions of those standards, understanding that they're a major change from how things were done for the prior 30 years or so. But that's old news, so we're not going to talk about what happened before the current versions. In terms of what's under development, and is in the case of the first one is getting close to the finish line, ASC 728, so the 2028 version of the standard, is going to have Chapter 5 for flood loads, like it has, with some updates since this last one we did, as well as the new chapter I mentioned, Chapter 36 on future conditions, which will have future conditions for snow, rain, and flood, and others. So both of those will be in that. And then we're just started work on the next edition of ASC 24, which is anticipated to be published in 2030. And so we have a bit more time to work with for that standard. So I'm going to go through kind of the highlights here quick. I think I get 15 minutes because I have 3 different chapters and standards. I think I'll use that time. But at the high level, one very important thing to understand is where is our source for flood data in building codes and these ASC standards? It's the FEMA flood hazard data from the FEMA firms and the FEMA FISs. So the building codes themselves really adopt that, but they typically do adopt the FEMA standards for a couple main reasons. Maybe there's more, but two main reasons that come to me are, first, ensure that building construction complies with the minimum requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program, which use those maps. Those communities have to at least comply with the minimum requirements of the NFIP, which use the FEMA maps by default. And so using those maps also allows them to do that. And to avoid any expense and cost and the time associated with developing their own local flood hazard map, a study that they would adopt at a local level. And so as a result, because the communities typically adopt those, the standards themselves are really written around the assumed adoption of those FEMA firms and FIS. Everything we prescribe within the standard is really written assuming that's the data you're working with. And so we're using special flood hazard areas, the 100-year floodplain, and now shaded X zones, the 500-year floodplains, as kind of the terms for applicability and the extents of flood zones. And we're using base flood elevations or still water elevations, in case riverine flood elevations, the data that you usually would have available to you through FEMA. And it's important to note that the use of the FEMA flood hazard data also provides a relatively uniform source for flood hazard data across all the jurisdictions that would use these codes and standards, which is kind of a prerequisite for how these work and how the balloting process within the standard works. We need to have static data that's uniform and available everywhere that might end up using the standards in order to get through the hurdles of this process. Having something that regionally works in Florida but doesn't work in California isn't really something that can make it through all the hurdles for the process. We need to be uniform and universal. So what the loads that are in ASC 7 for flood, we design for hydrostatic, hydrodynamic, waves, debris impact, and all those for coastal flooding. Non-coastal flooding is all the same, but no waves. And one important thing to note is there's a key parameter that in the way these loads are computed often feeds into all the loads. And that's the term that shows up in some of these equations as DF, which is the flood depth, or in the case of coastal flooding, the still water depth. So it's of course going to give you your hydrostatic pressures based on how much water you have. When you don't have velocity data, which we usually don't in coastal cases, it's going to be the basis for scaling your velocity. When you don't have wave height data, it's going to be your basis for your wave heights based on depth limit of waves. So it's a very important factor or value, and it's what we pull from a map or a study in terms of where the still water elevation is relative to grade. And you can see the equation for how you compute it down there. Now it's based on an MRI-based elevation. We subtract eroded grade, considering coastal erosion when that's a factor, and we add in a value for sea level rise. And I'll come back to those two things. And some people might know this by heart, but for folks that don't deal in this every day, we use risk categories within these standards. In the case of ASC 24, we call them flood design classes, and they're pretty close to the same. But it's an important aspect of how you compute the loads. So risk category 1 buildings are agricultural buildings, really non-important buildings, sheds, storage sheds, that sort of thing. We don't deal with those there too often. Most buildings that most folks deal with on a day-to-day basis are what we call risk category 2. That's commercial, multifamily, residential, lots of other buildings too. When we get to risk category 3, that's buildings with high occupancy or some importance, like schools and churches or assembly facilities. And then risk category 4 would be essential facilities like hospitals, police stations, the like. So remember those, just going from 1 to 4, more importance, because now within the latest versions of these standards, we design to an MRI-based flood elevation corresponding to the risk category. So risk category 1 is the 100-year. Risk category 2 is the 500-year. So that's most buildings. And then as you move up the chain to 3 and 4, you go to the 750 and the 1,000. And that was affirmed through a reliability analysis. That's a requirement for how we get these adopted, to show that you can meet a certain reliability target with those MRI-based elevations for all those risk categories. And that reliability target changes as you move up in importance. Of course, we don't have those flood elevations for those higher MRI yet. And so what's in the standards, both versions of the standards, a little bit different in how it's done because of the purpose of the two standards. But we essentially scale. There's values that were developed from some hazard curves looking at different coastal sources, and it's very high level. It's the Gulf, any other coastal source, so the Atlantic or the Pacific shoreline, the Great Lakes, and the riverine have their own scaling factors. The scale based on the 100-year, and in the case of ASC 24, we actually sometimes scale based on the 500-year if you have that available. But understanding that most locations, we're not going to have the 750 and the 1,000 through the flood source or the data source that the building code adopts. We scale to get to those higher MRI stillwater elevations. Applicability is generally follows the same route, but given that we don't ever have a map and making that determination, and a practicing engineer who's not familiar with flood and doesn't deal with it every day, making the determination of 750 and the 1,000, you can't scale it the same way. And so we apply the flood requirements within the 100-year floodplain for risk category 1, and then 2, 3, 4 is the 500-year, because we don't have the 750 and the 1,000. And that's more of a challenge for practitioners to manually determine the extents of a 750 or 1,000-year floodplain. You can't just scale it like you can the elevation. Sea level change, what's included in the current versions of these standards in Chapter 5 ASC 7 and ASC 2424 are you got to count for sea level change, but the minimum requirement. So what most people will do is the historic rate of sea level change over a 50-year cycle. So just that linear measured change from the nearest NOAA gauge or wherever your source is from the historic change. What's in development in Chapter 36 is likely going to adopt the intermediate scenario from the 2022 interagency report. And that's been affirmed by reliability analyses, just like we did for Chapter 5. So that's what's going to be most likely in Chapter 36 in the 2028 version of ASC 7. In both cases, this is just a linear addition of the value to the present day flood hazard because of the lack of data that's universal and uniform for actual true future conditions, flood elevations. It's just a simple add like you saw in that equation earlier. Velocity, we scale based on a coefficient times the square root of g times the depth. So like I said, we're using that depth. There's a factor that was reduced in the last cycle and will likely be further reduced based on more information we got from the core. But again, we're scaling these based on a simple equation because the studies we use for the flood hazards generally don't have those coastal velocities at a site level. So it's just based on depth. In the interest of time, because I am going long here, the wave procedure, there's various scenarios for how you're going to compute your wave loads. Moving from right to left is when you have more information. So the most conservative ends up being on the right. That's what most people are going to have in most scenarios because we don't have wave heights, especially for those different MRI flood events in the FEMA standards. But in a few cases we do, and you would get more precise based on that location-specific wave height. And then one thing that's not I should say is in the standard right now, but has the language you see at the top. It requires practitioners to consider the effects of coastal erosion, but it doesn't include currently any methodologies, parameters within the standard. It's kind of up to the practitioner to figure out how to address it. What's currently under consideration for the next cycle is to have some more specifics on it, and we have a simplified method that is in a FEMA guide that's under development and might be in the next edition of ASC 7 to basically account for shoreline change using the USGS Coastal Change Hazards Portal, long-term shoreline change rates, and move the shoreline back and get your grade elevation based on that very simplified method of coastal erosion. Okay, I got 1 minute left in my time slot, and we can talk about this in more detail, but this is just to end with, here's kind of our brainstorming as a group of members of these three committees of kind of where we see the likely needs for additional information that would help make some of this less conservative, make some of it more accurate, make it easier for practitioners. So I'll just read through these and we can talk about them in more detail as folks have questions. So of course, because we don't have it on maps, the 750 and the 1,000-year flood extents, or some simple approaches that practitioners or officials could use to reasonably estimate them in a way that someone who's not a coastal engineer or a coastal scientist or even a civil engineer, these are structural engineers usually using this standard, can get an accurate depiction of those flood extents. Flood extents for location-specific combinations of sea level change and MRI-based flood events, or simple approaches that they can use to estimate them. So same idea, we don't have maps that depict the flood extents with the sea level change baked into it, as well as for the various MRIs we're using now. So that's something that we want to figure out a way to have so we can regulate to those zones as well. Refined approaches for determining or estimating MRI-based wave parameters and flood velocity using the data we currently have. Again, because we're using the FEMA data, when we do have waves and velocities, it's that 100-year. And like I said, we're not usually designing to the 100-year for most buildings now. We're designing for the 500 or higher. So that's something. Boundaries of velocity zones for higher MRI flood events. Again, if you're familiar with FEMA maps, there's different zones depending on the wave heights. And those are all based on the 100-year. And so we currently can't apply different requirements for buildings in those higher MRI flood events, the risk category 2 and above, for those higher wave heights. Data on rate of rise, because in flood proofing applications, there's limitations on when you can do it based on how quickly the water rises, how much time do you have to respond. So understanding if there's a way to estimate rate of rise at a site level, how quickly the water will rise. Refined approaches or improvements on the coastal erosion shoreline computations. I know I showed you that method for about 30 seconds, but that's what we have currently under development and looking to make that more refined. And then I know there's another group here to talk about this in more detail, but uniform and universal sources or methodologies for defining compound flood hazards that we could adopt or reference. Again, most of the FEMA maps don't have that. Some communities have that at their own level. Sometimes they adopt it at a local level, but that's a big risk that's not captured in the flood maps and therefore not captured in the standards universally. Okay, I went a couple minutes over. Sorry about that, but that's what I had here, and happy to talk about anything in more detail.
All right, thanks, Matt. No, that's fine. This list here, this bulleted list, I think is really the key to the discussion. So I appreciate all the effort you put into it. We're going to do some quick questions just for clarification, and then I want to give Noah an opportunity to maybe react to some of this. Chris Anderson.
Matt, really good presentation. I really appreciate how you got to the main points really quick. And I just have two process questions. One process question involves, you mentioned flood insurance studies that may be done to build upon FEMA or go beyond the firm maps. In the current approach, is that the way that future conditions would come into a flood loads analysis, is through a flood insurance study separate from the firms or in addition to the firms? And then the second, in the end, you said that there was the intermediate scenario for the 2022 report for sea level rise. And is the intermediate scenario selected by a peer review process or by like a committee decision, or is it voted upon by ASCE? How does that get to be selected? What is that procedure?
Sure. Yeah. So for the first piece, being a brand new chapter, what basically the content of chapter 36 is mostly limited to the sea level rise. But what an additional thing that's in there is that if a community is adopting or already has a study that they use for zoning purposes or in a building code that represents future conditions, that then becomes the basis for your flood loads that you apply to the building. Because again, chapter 36 is an ASC 7, so it's flood loads only. It's not going to set floor elevations or the like. And most communities don't have such a document, but where they have a study, an additional study that represents future conditions that they use for regulatory purposes, then this new chapter adopts those elevations in place of the FEMA elevations where they're greater. So it has that mechanism baked in there. But again, since that's not universal, it's really just set up to work at a jurisdiction by jurisdiction level. And then yes, the selection of the intermediate scenario is essentially decision by committee, but affirmed through that reliability analysis. We went through a year-long process of testing different scenarios for different sites through the reliability analyses and found that to achieve the targets we need to achieve, the intermediate scenario gets there. And the other scenarios are a little bit too conservative. And I understand the process of validating and getting all the way to the end through this. The other scenarios were kind of deemed out even for the higher risk categories because you still get the 1,000-year flood event for the risk category 4, and then you're adding the intermediate scenario to it. Now, I will say the way this data gets delivered to practitioners is something called the ASC hazard tool. So practitioners will go in and type in their address and they get all the hazard information. And the intent, at least my intent, is that that hazard tool will give all the scenarios. So practitioners will be aware of the scenarios, where they come from. The minimum requirement through chapter 36 will be the intermediate, but they'll have that information to them. They'll have that information available to them in terms of the other scenarios that are beyond intermediate.
All right, excellent. Any other clarification questions? Doug and the
Hey,
Noah.
Dan, I've got one. Sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
I see one in the chat from Jessica that I think would be beneficial to others. Jessica, can you say it to the group, please?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if the question that was brought up regarding the flood insurance study, that's usually produced by FEMA and it comes out with the FEMA flood insurance rate map. So like for every flood map, there's a set of studies for that region. So I wasn't sure if the question was regarding to like an individual community study or understanding that the flood insurance studies are from FEMA and accompany the map. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't clear when I was saying the communities do have the option and do sometimes have their own study that if it's more restrictive than the FEMA study, they can adopt. But not a lot of communities do that. But they can, so long as they're meeting the minimum requirements of the FIP.
All right, thanks. Doug, I see you get your hand up.
Yeah, and Matt, good to see you again. Matt and I talked about this a while back, a few of these things, but where to begin here? So I was involved a lot in the federal flood risk management standard development, the climate informed science approach. And when we had a science group and we had a bunch of agencies were on that, including the Corps, Kate White and Will Veach and others. And, we actually wrote a science paper or like an issue paper and basically said, do not use the 500-year data for coastal. First of all, well, I'm just curious how you get a 750 and 1,000-year return period using, data we only have maybe 30 years of record for. That doesn't, I mean, the uncertainty's got to be unbelievable. The range, I don't know how you guys figure that out, but I mean, you have to kind of go with the synthetic storm approach like the Corps does, and I get that. But the the biggest problem is, well, one, the availability of 500-year flood maps, 500-year zone in coastal areas is very incomplete. Now, the 100 is there, but not the 500 in a lot of places. And the 500-year and coastal does not include waves, right? So the 100-year plus waves, whether it's 1.5, which is the Limwa, or the VE, velocity zone, which is the 3 foot, but the 500 does not include waves. So in some cases, you can actually have the 100-year plus waves will be higher than the 500-year because of the additional addition of the waves. So anyway,
well, yeah. I mean, so to speak to that, yeah, there, where you don't have 500-year flood elevations, you still are required to do it in the 100 years. So there are locations where, one jurisdiction where they have the 500-year mapped, more buildings might be subject to the requirements than another zone where the maps are so far behind they don't have the 500-year map. You're still required to do it within the SFHA, the 100-year all the time. And I don't think there's a scenario where, because we base this on still water, you're not going to have a scenario where designed to the 500-year still water and computing your waves based on that. If you have depth limited waves, you're going to end up with lower flood elevations than you would using the 100-year, and because you're always going to compute the waves based on the data you have. So if you don't have the wave in ASC 24, if you don't have the wave heights for the 500-year, you're still beholden to the BFE as a minimum. Okay. There's always the safety net there, essentially. In terms of the scaling factors, I wasn't involved in that. I don't know. I think Chris Sereno's on here. You might have been involved in that, and Dan. I don't know if we want to get into it at this point, but there's a study that developed those scaling factors, looking at developing hazard curves, and I don't know exactly where all that data was pulled from.
I can jump in real quick. It was based on extensive modeling from U.S. Army Corps, so their coastal hazard system, East Coast, Florida, Texas, Gulf Coast. So it was extensive numerical modeling, and it's the same data set that FEMA is using for FFRD. So it's comprehensive, has free surface elevation, has waves in it. So it's very, very detailed.
Okay, that was going to be my next question about, because FEMA is, I assume, still working on FFRD, which will be a band, a probability band instead of in and out. But is that going to be ready by the time this gets published? I'm not.
It's already published. The standard's already out.
Yeah, I guess is the data there for FFRD to use. I don't think they have a comprehensive data set nationwide yet. FEMA doesn't.
No, that's why the tables are there.
Most communities in their flood insurance studies that accompany their flood insurance rate map have a 500-year still water elevation published. So the data that ASCE 7 and ASCE 24 are drawing from is primarily the 500-year still water elevation. And from that, there are scaling factors to estimate what the wave height would be for that still water elevation based on wave heights you have for 100-year or lesser elevations. So like really the data point that most of the standards are using is 500-year still water, which is generally in a community's flood insurance study. There are some newer communities where FEMA's flood insurance study also includes coastal transects with waves for the 500-year. That's less common, but really the data point we're using is still water elevation, and everything else is scaled based on expected wave height for that still water elevation.
Yeah, I'm just going to wade in here just real quickly. And I think unless you're involved in these standards on an ongoing basis, it's very easy. There's the published standard that was released in 22. There's a cycle that's wrapping up for ASCE 7, which will come out in 28. That's essentially in the can, more or less. What we're really trying to look at is that next cycle that will begin here in a couple years and would eventually manifest itself in 34 or roughly 34. And so, they got a whole committee process for figuring out how they're going to do it now. It's more like where would they like to be and how can NOAA or the other federal agencies support them in the next cycle? So I just want to make that clear
Yeah.
because I think that's really where we need to go with these discussions is how do we inform the next cycle?
Yeah, and to that point, and to what Doug's asking about, this whole scaling procedure is a little bit of the tail wagging the dog in the sense of the intent was once you have FFRD and once you have all these elevations at some point, you wouldn't be scaling. It's written in such a way as if you have the location specific values, wave heights, elevations, velocity, that rules. This is a scaling procedure of how to do it when you don't have the data, which many cases you don't right now, but is relatively conservative and developed through these hazard curves.
And I thought Billy Sweet had his hand up at one time. Billy, do you have a question or comment?
Well, it was just, I heard someone mention the coastal hazard system, right? And that's sort of the basis of our project, working with Naberta, Nadal, and others, is revisiting some of the storm computations to get out to the 1,000-year as well as down to the annual fusion of our coastal reanalysis. But I think that sort of covered it. I mean, the basis is getting back to Doug's point. It's like, yeah, you might be data limited, but if the data is coming from the course coastal hazard, then they've sort of already, rolled the dice over long periods of time to get what those results should be. But hopefully with the forthcoming study that we're working on, a few years from now, not sure if it's inclusion of additional tropical storms, but I think just the way we're going to rejigger it, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was interested in 1,000-year return intervals. So if they weren't explicitly computed prior, hopefully we have some at least additional data to provide, but not necessarily for right now.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Billy. All right, so we kind of need to wrap this up a little bit. So let me just kind of use this as a case in point. Obviously, these standards are going to be starting a new cycle. The authors of these standards are very busy right now trying to get the one that's the wolf at the door, so to speak, completed. So what we want to do as we come away from this meeting is think about how do we organize ourselves? Is there value in these discussions? How do we promote these discussions so that as they go into that next cycle, they can, act on some of the points that Matt made on that last slide? That's really where we're kind of going. I mean, to be honest with you, if there's some issues that bubble up from across these standards that we've identified in this discussion, and we can organize some additional conversations to try to address those technical needs. So that's really where we're going. It's kind of like, where are we now? Is there a pain point here that we could address going forward? And then how do we organize ourselves to address that pain point, so to speak? But Matt, that was great way to get us started. So with that, then we're going to change gears now, and we're going to go to the Compound Flooding Manual of Practice. This is a manual of practice that's been in development at ASCE for a while. Rolf and his team have given many briefings on the Compound Flooding Manual. I believe it's in Blue Ribbon Review now. Is that right, Rolf? Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. So we're kind of nearing the end point here for that. But I think what's going to be interesting is obviously when we develop a manual of practice, we're looking at kind of some of the wicked problems that are associated with engineering design, and therefore they can give us some insight into what might be an approach to take going forward, especially with respect to compound effects of inland freshwater flooding and then coastal storm surge, et cetera. So this is a little bit different than the standard. I just wanted to kind of set that stage, and then Rolf, I'm going to turn it over to you and Jada.
Okay, let me start first, and then Jada will follow up later. So do you see my screen? Okay.
Yep,
and
you're
the
good.
presentation. Okay, so I briefed this to this group. I know some of you weren't weren't at that meeting, already in detail, our whole committee briefed it. But the objective of a manual practice is to provide guidelines to a practicing engineer on how to analyze potential for compound flooding for engineer planning and design. And the manual practice contains several different sections. We talk extensively about different modeling processes, both statistical and hydrodynamically based models, and how to link them, and then talk specifically about joint probability methods of the Corps of Engineers. We talk about non-stationary conditions, particularly the changing climate and how that might affect compound flooding. And then we have a section on risk uncertainty analysis and with case studies. So the primary drivers of compound flooding in coastal regions are both precipitation and storm surge. And these, of course, can be correlated, let's say, in tropical storms and hurricanes and extratropical storms. So there's various, one area we're interested in is precipitation and rainfall runoff processes, how precip translate into surface runoff, and various data concerned with that are listed here. And then often riverine floods contribute to estuary levels and interact with storm surges. And that also, there's a different process to model the riverine flows. And groundwater is actually, in parts of the country like Florida, is actually a contributor to compound flooding. We talk a little bit about that. Ocean levels are based on a number of factors: tide, sea level, storm surge, and then the storm surge models itself are based on wind speed, wind direction, atmospheric pressure, size of the hurricane. So, and then the big concern with compound flooding is how these various processes interact with each other and what's their correlation. In addition, there's a number of impacts other than the climate that interact with, that affect our modeling: land use, land cover, soil type, topography, bathymetry, antecedent conditions. And then one, I guess, that this group would be interested in is time and magnitude of individual flood drivers. So that will affect how correlated, let's say, river flow is with the coastal storm surge. And then we were asked to, we don't talk about spatial and temporal resolution data. I guess we sort of accept what's given in the manual practice. So let me talk about climate projections for a little bit. We do talk about different approaches to climate projections. So I went to a meeting, I guess, a couple of years ago, and the climate scientists said that the global climate models are not appropriate for looking at small scale and very short temporal time periods. But then in the same period, a civil engineer was talking about how he could downscale these climate models to look at a few city blocks and narrowly time schedule. So I guess the civil engineers have to recognize the uncertainty behind all these climate projections. And one of the roles of NOAA would be to actually say how climate projections should be applied to civil engineering practice. So we do take a risk-informed approach for how we deal with climate projections. And I guess one thing I think should be appropriate is look at what is the uncertainty of these climate models. And maybe this is not just produce, I guess, better downscaling, but look at a broader range of climate projections that use a range of parameters to try to get a better idea of what are the range of future uncertainty with various different climates. So I guess we do recommend, I guess, dynamical downscaling, because one of the things that with compound flooding, we were interested in how the correlation among these variables change, and that might be a better way to capture the physics. So if hurricanes are getting more intense, so storm surge increases and precipitation increases, that may be a change in sort of the compound flooding. So here's some gaps our team identified: lack of short duration observations of precip, and then this also extends into short duration projections of precip, and then also how storms are intensifying across different durations of time. So I have some other recommendations here that weren't on the list of questions, and one is a lot of this data is not NOAA data. It would be better for the various agencies to work together to provide coastal inundation information. And the Integrated Water Resource Science and Services was started during the Obama administration, who wrote an executive order for agencies to work together. And it's still present on the website, the USGS Corps and NOAA, but I don't think they're actually following anymore. But it's something AAC should consider, is how to actually get the agencies to work together. So that's all I have. And I think Jada will follow with much more detail. So,
all right. Yeah, no, I love that last comment, Rolf, and that's what we're all about here. So, Jada?
Sound check. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Oh, that is great. What a change and improvement. Yeah, I don't want to take too much time introducing myself because I have a slide doing it. But first of all, let me start with thanking for having me in this call. So I'm not directly involved with the manual of practice for the compound flooding. I'm a review committee for that activity. But I have been doing some work for the Army Corps of Engineers. This is why I really appreciate that actually opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we have been doing for compound flooding and also some of the related work. So first of all, can you see my screen okay?
I see you, but I don't see your screen yet.
Yeah, see, I think that this is going to take a little while to come in. I'm not sure what's going on.
Yep, it's going. All right, now we see.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So again, let me start with what I have been doing that might be relevant for this committee, because I heard Will Veach's name, that a couple of people mentioned this. So a few years ago, I started supporting him for the coastal resilience. I am currently overseeing upgrades to our sea level analysis tool and also the guidance updates related to sea level change. We have been gearing up and preparing for how we are changing our sea level change projections. We just got the funding 10 days ago. So we are expecting a major change in the sea level analysis tool and also the way that we are computing the curves in the next fiscal year. So if you're using our tool or the projections for your project, for your studies or the documents, and then you would like to coordinate to make sure that our efforts are aligned, please feel free to reach me out. And another thing that I have been doing in the last couple of years is leading the development of a Department of War extreme precipitation analysis tool. The tool has been developed. It is up and ready, running in the DCAT platform. This was done with a regular briefing to the NOAA Atlas 15 folks. It is doing an engineering application of what the NOAA Atlas 15 and other projections are doing for the IDF curve projections. Unfortunately, it is only available for the DOW folks right now, but we are hoping that maybe in a few years, we will be able to start pulling in for civil work applications. And then the most relevant to this discussion is that I'm coordinating the Army Corps-wide, agency-wide efforts for compound flooding focus group. And that focus group has multiple work streams. And the first work stream that I'm going to talk about it, because this is where our immediate data needs lay, is screening level joint probability analysis and transition zone identification. We also have a whole lot of work going on for the statistical analysis methods and the tool development. We have a brand new tool is coming doing cupola analysis. It is called HEC Neptune. We have various numerical modeling workflows and then activities going on. I think you have some experience with some of the folks working on numerical modeling development. And then the fourth one that goes to the actual last bullet that Matt was talking about, we are working on a guidance development that sets the standards and then some kind of workflows of how to assess the compound flooding. So with that, I would like to talk about a couple of like essential questions to frame the questions that I'm going to pose about the data needs and why that I would like to focus on here today. So again, in Army Corps, we're developing a workflow for the compound flooding analysis. And the first question, the threshold question for us, is to really determine if the compound flooding change design decisions at a project site. This question is very fundamental because it really sets the standard, understand how much effort that we should be planning. It has a budget, scheduling, and also really a lot of design consequences based on this, the answer to this question.
Jada, I hate
Yes,
to interrupt you. How many slides do you have?
I think I have 7.
Can you kind of cut to the chase a little bit? We've got a lot more material to cover, and
No
I want to
problem.
make sure that we can discuss,
Sure.
have some good discussion. So,
I understand.
yeah, I would appreciate it. I'm sure you've got
So-
some resources to share. We can figure out how to do that, maybe even through the task force. But
Exactly. So I feel like, again, I think that is just one more slide before I talk about the data needs.
Go for
is
it.
that is, I think, like our workflow currently is starting from the screening analysis, doing analysis, deeper analysis for the driver dependence and the probabilities, and then the modeling. So the workflow is starting from here, and then here comes our data needs. So first, let me discuss with what we have already existing and what is needed. So for the screening level analysis, what is needed first of all, the existing information, and it is available in the digital coast hazard layers, which we are super grateful and we get a lot of use for it, is that there's already like an individual hazard layers are available there. But they have limited applicability for the compound flooding analysis because they are not indexed for the probabilities. So what we are looking for, and then not necessarily directly request from NOAA, we also have some ability to work on this, is to develop some overlapping layers that will help as a really ballpark number of what will be the transition zones so that the engineering teams will know if this is a concern for the study area or not. And then just one more thing before I go into the specifics of the data needs, like currently, for example, what we have is the high tide flooding that is indexed to the major, moderate, minor kind of information, not really the probabilities, and it is for a good reason. The same thing for the storm surge, it is tied to the hurricane categories, and then sea level change also within the foot increments. We have very good coverage for the FEMA, both for the coastal and inland, but they only have extreme zones. They don't really have the intermediate exceedance probabilities. So, and then I have 3 more slides. And the rest of the slides.
I don't think we have time for 3 more slides, to be honest with you. And I think we've lost your screen. I'm back to looking at everybody's faces. So maybe share your screen and maybe jump to the data needs.
I want the actual data needs screen, but I don't think that you're seeing it.
There you go. Excellent.
So I have 3 more slides, and then they're all directly addressing the questions that you asked. And the question that you asked, the first one, was the specific data, tools, and information needed. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see it, Jada.
If you don't have time to discuss it, I will be happy to actually provide them in a written format if it's going to help with the timing.
Well, and as I mentioned before, depending on the outcome of these discussions, we're going to be having additional discussions. So, this was really kind of like to give us an overview of these ASCE documents. So, go ahead, take another minute. But we can definitely don't worry about that. This is not your last bite at the apple. Okay.
Okay. So the bottom line here is that I think we have some ideas of what kind of information, with some of them a little bit larger efforts, some of them are easier efforts to help us develop the screening level identification of the transition zones. And then a big task maybe is to really, and I don't want to go into like individual ones, but the bottom line here is that we need to have some kind of a consistent data sets within the inland and coastal datum so that we will be able to use it. And another related task is about the Atlas 1415. We currently have the IDFs only for all of the rainfall. It will be great to have some storm stratification. So this is the take home from this message, okay, this slide. So we have some specific feel for what exactly we will be needing for the transition zone identification. And the other one, again, I was not really planning to go into the details because, as you may see in my last line, I really would like to actually have maybe a follow-up discussion, maybe provide a written response of how are the uncertainties are characterized and what else can be done to help us actually incorporate in engineering design. And the last slide is about actually your question about how sensitive are civil engineering design practices to uncertainty. And the takeaway from the slide is this: the civil engineers have always dealt with the uncertainty. Either the coastal data or the climate uncertainty is not the first time you're dealing with it. But what makes it a little bit difficult here is that really reliable quantification and then consistent approach of identifying uncertainties. And believe it or not, right now, the gaps in how we are characterizing the uncertainty is a major hindrance for the design adoption. With that, I can really stop here and then take it from there. Again, as I said, you let me know if you would like me to expand on any of these points, or we'll have a follow-up discussion. I will be more than happy to coordinate it.
No, thanks, Jada. I appreciate that. And it would really be helpful for us if you could send your slides to Megan, since we didn't get to all of them, because I think there's a lot of content there, useful content. So,
sure.
I don't know, Billy, Matt, Rolf, Doug, any reactions to that discussion? I think you're probably pretty familiar with a lot of it, but if you have any clarification questions or amplifications, because I think how the compound flooding manual it maps back to future, how we deal with these issues in future standards is going to be really key. That's the reason why we do these manuals. So I was just wanted to give you an opportunity to react. You can think about
it. Well,
go ahead, Doug.
Bilal, you want to go first?
Go, Doug. Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm curious about, or would want to find out a little more information about the Corps coming up with are they developing a new set of sea level scenarios outside of the interagency task force space, or I don't.
I'm sorry, it will be more aligned with actually the interagency. Our current ones are not aligned. They're developed in 2013, and then we have been actually trying to make them more aligned. So it will not be a new set. If it is anything, it will be more like the interagency curves.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, we are not coming up with this. We are trying to get closer. Yeah, not away. Yeah.
All right, good. I'm going to go Billy and then Bilal, because I know Bilal's got some overarching question, I'm sure. Billy.
Yeah. I'm just curious too, and this is something that we're confronting at both comparing storm surge to rainfall. And I've talked to the modelers at ERDIC that are coming up, and Jada, you might have alluded to this, but the plausible rainfall amounts, not necessarily based on observation. So when we talk about future events, and I know we look at climate models to provide guidance on how things are changing, Atlas 15, for instance, is still based on observation. Regionalization helps, space for time substitution, but the surprises are still out there. But are they surprises if you do sort of the method that the Corps did for storm surge? Roll the dice, simulate storms that could happen that have not been observed. So, in this idea of compound, sometimes what is the 1%? Is it observational based? Is it sort of more of a plausible storm set? And if we have differences between storm surge computations and rainfall, and we do a joint probability, I think we're going to have differences in the singular univariate probabilities if we don't come to an agreement on, what is the plausible 1% now, and sort of uniformly pursue this in the other parameters, rainfall, for instance, and storm surge. So that I feel like we blanketed it. You roll the dice, you get it now. Yes, our hurricane's going to intensify. Maybe they already are intense. We just haven't really seen enough of them. So I feel like there is some discussion left there in that with the concept.
Sure. Do you want me to address this, or is this I know that we are running out of time, Dan.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to go to the other questioners, and then we can, maybe come back to some of these key things at the end of the program. So Bilal, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to go to Kelly because Kelly's been very involved with the preset piece of this at NOAA. So Kelly?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dan. I just had a quick question, actually. So Jada mentioned storm typing. By the way, I'm Kelly Mahoney, a research meteorologist at NOAA, and I'm leading the Modernizing Probable Max Preset project, kind of a sister to Atlas 15. I know the Corps' background in storm typing. I was just wondering for ASCE, sort of the future things that we've been talking about. Does storm typing come into the manuals of practice or the standards, or is it does everything stick to IDF?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer this. Maybe wrong for someone else.
Yeah, we look at storm types. We don't really actually use IDF in the manual practice. We've referred to extratropical storms and the tropical storms, and yeah, we do look at storm types more than IDF curves.
Kelly, I can talk about it from the Army Corps. I know that this is an ASC and we would like to talk about the standards, but what we are doing in our flow work, actually, we are separating the tropical versus the extropical when we are trying to identify the historical conditions and the probabilities. And then we are combining them back again once we did the statistical analysis.
All right, thanks, Jada. All right, Bilal?
Yes, I'm glad to see great progress, Rolf, on the manual of practice. And I just learned about the guidance document at the Army Corps in dealing with compound flooding. So, I mean, I could see an opportunity to maybe examine the two, at a structural level, what's included, planning horizon, and so on. And then this could maybe help to generate what are the data needs that could feed on both. Also, what brings this is one part of my comment. The second part, when we deal with load combinations from structures, there is a correlation certainly is accounted for, and sometimes the correlation is reflected by reduction of one load type and so on as you bring them together. So this might affect what type of the information we need in order to account for the floodings, the compound flooding component correlations that could maybe affect the way we come up with the design at the very end. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Bilal, if you lower your hand, then I won't call on you again by accident. All right, excellent. Okay. I'm jotting down some things. I'm seeing some threads that we will come back and try to capture at the end. So with this now, we're going to change gears. Obviously, we're bloating through the break, but we hardly ever use the break on these calls. We just have it in there for a little cushion. So what we're going to do now is talk about ASCE 80, and that's Scott Hicks and Mustafa Saman are going to be talking about their weather and climate information needs. Who's got the steering wheel here? Scott, are you good to go?
Then actually that is going to be Min and I, Weisha, will be presenting. So I will share
Is this the
screen.
one where we had the titles backwards and we didn't get it correctly?
Yes.
I have
Yes,
a draft
I'll own that.
that I'm looking at, so I apologize. Okay, so
I will. Okay, let me see. I'm gonna share screen.
yep,
Oh,
there we go. Okay,
okay.
go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
That's on me. I was looking at an old agenda.
Okay, what is it? And then let me go to the. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, Ming and I gonna tag these, and I'll let Ming go first. Talk about ASC Corporate 80.
Yeah.
Ming, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ming.
Okay, yeah, I just 3 minutes. ASC 80 is design standards of pier and wharf. This is a new development. Right now, there's no national design standard for pier and wharf. Each port, they have their own standard, like Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles, They have a different, slightly different load combination of factors. So that's why ASE Corporate is developing the national standard. We have been working on this like 7 or 8 years. We still, hopefully, we can get this done in a couple years. So the pier and wharf, I show you the photo, is very simple structure. We have a concrete deck, majority of them supported by pile. The things I want to point out is extreme water level. This is very important design variables because this includes tide, storm surge, sea level rise, sea level change. It's directly related to LoVa data. So Xixia will talk about more data we require. Next slide, please.
See.
Yeah. So when we design the PR wharf, we look at the dead load, live load. There's nothing to do with the NOVA data, but environmental load include the wind, current, wave, and flood. This is directly related to NOVA data. We also had a vessel-related load, like a mooring load. When you have a ship berth on the pier, the cable will pulled out, that's a load. Is a person load is function of the wave, wind, or current. So it's indirectly related to NOVA data. Of course, for the extreme case, we look at the tsunami load, ice load, or the collision. So that's when we do the design, we have to look at this. To look at each one and what NOVA can provide. Next slide, please. Yeah, as Bila mentioned, load combination is very important. Load factor, how are we going to do combine it together? Right now, we combine with AC7 load combination and ASHTO because of very similar loading condition. So when there's no ship berth there, we just use the AC7 1 dead load and 1.6 live load. But when the vessel is there, so we have a look at the wind. A wind is less than the operational limit. We have a full operation live load, the crane load. But if above the wind certain limit, there's a reduced activities. So we have considered that. Also, we look at tsunami ice as an extreme event. But most important information we need is return period. I think we just talk about how we got 1,000 years, 100 years, whatever the reason. So from the raw data come to the return period, there's statistics analysis, extreme value analysis. Now the question is, we industry were going to do that, or NOVA can provide the things apply to the waterfront coastal the pier wharf. So that's we're debating. I'm in charge of the chapter 2 load and load combination. I've been working there for a couple 3-4 years. Hopefully I'll learn more from here from expert from the NOVA experts. Okay. Right now, we just based on AC7 to whatever they come out. But we don't believe that complete true. We want to some modification. Okay, Xixia, it's your turn. Next.
Thank you. So I'm a coastal engineer in practice, and so I will be talking about the data to additional needs or proposed data needs to support the design of piers and wharf. This is the list of the data we use very frequently. We definitely use NOAA data a lot, provide really good base for our design work. And some of these some people may have already touched it. Vertical data is a very critical information we use a lot and currently provided in active tide gauge and also some predicted stations. Often include in the active gauge include NAVD ADA and also tidal datums, and in the prediction mainly limited to tidal datums. So what we would like to propose is First, the decimal point is very important. If it's for a wetland design, it doesn't really matter for engineering. We would recommend to carry extra decimals. Right now, it's like a 1 to 2 decimals, depends on unit. And the other thing is, it's very important to include the NGVD29 vertical datum in all those stations. Seems like Ming was pointing out, like ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, they are still using the NGVD29 datum. So, but a lot of new surveys are using NAVD, ADA. So it'll be a good tool to have them available so we can convert it easily. Certainly, NOAA's V datum tool is very user-friendly, very useful, but it will be easier if all these are included in the NOAA datum chart, and also include all the historical epochs. Like, for example, in Port Long Beach, Los Angeles, there's an older tide epoch from 1924 to 32. They are still using that epoch, so it will be good to have them all included. It will be easier for the user to convert. The second part is certainly there are a lot of observed and predicted data related to waves, water levels, meteorological and current data, and currently often limited to download monthly. And not all data have a preview or visualization, as you see to the right, which is very useful for the user to see what data we're looking at, and often not a statistic available. Some parameters have really good statistics like water levels, but not others. And we'll propose to NOAA to provide some preview and utilization so that before download, and also the extreme value analysis to come up with return period we have just talked about that will improve consistency and also prevent misuse. Sometimes people might use 15 years old data to come up 100 or 500 return period data. That's really, if you don't understand how much uncertainties that have involved, it's not really a good practice. So it'll be good that we have consistency on that. And the other thing is we often hear that storm has been intensifying and the largest events have been, the frequency of large event has been increasing. So it'll be great if NOAA can provide trends on that, like wave height or intensity. That will be very useful for the designers. And the next part is agency maintain the data access API to be provided in Python or MATLAB too, so that will be improve efficiency on download and also like continuous data download, so the practitioner can come up with statistic analysis. And another thing is that we often hear this year, for example, El Nino, the chance of El Nino is very high. If NOAA could provide the index, that will be useful. And then one thing we feel really grateful is NOAA's data is very consistent in the format, so made our download script or API work very seamlessly. And then the other aspect is regional, global, long-term hindcast model results of waves and winds. Some of the past data available are discontinued and new tools are available. This new forecast model GFS is great, have great user interface. We'll propose if these historical can be archived to have a historical data, so that will be really helpful to have that. And so that will help us to create histories of these type of predictions or forecast. And the other kind of data set is shoreline change, cliff, bluff, retreat data that related to beach or shoreline erosion. Currently, there is updated, continuously updated shoreline product with a great tool that provides the most up-to-date shoreline of the United States and its territories. And in this tool, it's a current shoreline. So we recommend that to archive these current shoreline data so that we have a history of the shoreline positions. And the other data set we use very frequently is the USGS Cosmos shoreline position cliff retreat predictions with future sea level rise. And another data set is COSAT. It is satellite image derived shoreline time series and provided freely by Dr. Killian Vos at the University of New South Wales. So, and also supported by USGS. We recommend that continued support of USGS so that so that we could have this type of continuous data products similar to the one showing on the right, basically showing how the beach widths are changing. For this one, currently update to about 2021, 2022, and now we have more frequent satellite images. So this will be really a great data set if we continuously support this program. This is my last slide. We really appreciate this discussion and allows the users to provide comments on what the industry would like to see.
All right, thank you. All right, so in the interest of time, I've got a question. Scott, you and Mustafa are going to be talking about this Ports and Harbors Manual of Practice. Is your content similar enough to what we just heard about for 80 that you could go next and then we could have one discussion of both of those? Or do you feel like you're going in a very different direction and that might be confusing?
Mustafa here. It is very similar, so we can go next.
Okay, why don't we do that then? We'll just hold and we'll discuss both of these efforts simultaneously. But thank you both, Ming and Zhizha, for that, and we'll be coming back real quick. Okay, go ahead, Mustafa.
No, great, thank you. I'll be presenting it. Let me share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is an MOP in progress. This is done.
I'm sorry, Mustafa, can you go to the presentation mode?
I'm sorry.
We're seeing more than just the slide, so I just think you'd make it larger. Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Yep, sure. Yeah, thanks. So this is a work of the Ports and Harbors Committee, and it's done through the Sea Level Change Subcommittee. Scott and I are the co-chairs in leading this effort. This is an MOP in progress. It's going through the Blue Ribbon panel reviews at the moment, so it is kind of well ahead in its progressing in that sense. The work we started doing on this is from 2012, so early. This is about 10 years, so 14 years now. It's been ongoing. It's always been challenged because the information gets updated quite continuously. The main focus for our work has been to the impact of sea level change on ports and harbors design processes, so the practitioners, the owners, and all stakeholders can come back to this and look at how to account for the sea level change. And as I said, this mainly focuses on sea level change. This is a risk-based framework that we are proposing. So the real value of sea level change comes in a small part. The document is structured around 8 chapters. First 2 are introductory, executive summary, introduction, and from chapter 3 to chapter 7 are the ones that deals with the subject matter, including asset inventory, which is one critical piece here, which defines the criticality of the asset that needs to be protected from flooding scenarios, and based on which we then define the risk-based approach and cost evaluation through a BCA assessment. And then you select the sea level from a scenario basis, a multiple scenario analysis. So if you go into primarily I'll just very quickly reflect here on the limitations. This is based on data that we have at the time of our publication. So sea level change projections are continuously updated. So definitely the practitioner also need to go back and find the latest information. Local jurisdictions have their own requirements. Some of them are so vast and so widespread that it is impossible to capture this in one place. So this is something the practitioners need to be aware of. And then our MOP does not comment on the modeling and the prediction projections on those areas. We're just taking the projections at their face values. There are two sources of primary information for the global sea level data that we are focusing on, but we also need to use the regional data and local scale data. And we have heard about most of those in the previous conversation already, so I'll not go much into that. But I'll just say that when you're selecting the scenarios, this would be either a global data or a local data. Then you have to take it to your emission projection space in a way that you can meaningfully use it for the asset you are concerned with. Also consider that there are many additional data, local data available from different regions. In our manual, we try to summarize them by regions, so East Coast, Gulf Coast, West Coast, and the Alaska and upper Northwest. So this land subsidence data and uplifted data has to come from sources like USGS or so. WESHIA has presented some of those challenges already. A local agency requires setting up the sea level change, and NOAA, U.S. Army Corps, and recently NASA, which hosts the IPCC data, they're all coming up with different magnitudes of these parameters. So it comes down to the practitioner to then go through all the maze of information and select which one would be most appropriate for them to use. And that we find to be a challenge that can be addressed in the future in a way that we have a common portal with the design-ready information that can be used. It could be hosted by ASC, could be hosted by NOAA, but this is something we see that as a potential for improvements. What we have not done in your manual is to include the compound flooding components, the concurrent hazards, and Rolf has presented on this on that manual. But essentially, we identify all these in our manual as to the things has to be included when flooding is concerned. When it is only looking at the sea level component, sea level rise or change component, our manual provides very clear directions on how to include that in a risk-based framework. But when it comes into the concurrent hazard or compound flooding, that is one more step or multiple steps more to account for site-specific considerations, like how many of those hazards would be concurrent at one place, and that might be different between different sites. So that consideration has to be there, which we wanted to address it in the next revision of our manual. But this is one area I think, as a practicing community, we see a lot of gaps in our standards and manuals at the moment. One other thing is the asset criticality, which is a key component in our framework. So it is important to have that asset inventory for all port facilities, which might be different for application in other areas than ports and harbors, the way we frame it up. We have grouped it, we have not tied it to the hazard class or types as defined by, say, IBC or ASC 24. So this way it is slightly different and open, and we might be able to utilize some of the definition for different types of structures coming in from ASC 7, 24, or IBC. We have one example given as to how to implement this in a risk-based framework, taking at different levels of sea level change taken from the data. This is national data basically. So looking at the 50th percentile, the 83rd percentile, and higher percentile values to see what it does in a BCA framework, the benefit cost assessment framework, so that an informed decision making can take place. So that's basically the framework we have now. This is my last slide, and I'm coming back to what we can do in a information space for AAC NOAA framework. Is that we see the sea level changes given in different platforms nationally at the moment, and so NOAA has its sea level change projection data from existing or data sets, major data sets. Army Corps provides its own projection tool to calculate different, using different equations. And NASA also holds, IPCC-based projection at the moment, which can actually provide local contents, local impacts, and provide sea level rise information at a particular location. So these are all good. But when it comes to what exactly you are going to the practitioner will need to use, it would be good to have one platform where all tested and accepted tools are put in place, maybe links to the accepted tools that as a guidance has to go as the first place. So that could be one of the recommendations from our consideration here. But also, the data has uncertainty and challenges with vertical datum, landslide data, and so forth. So all these are need to be synthesized for use. And as part of the task force, one thing can be thought about is how can we make one set of design-ready information so the practitioners can go and use it right away. So that's one of the consideration that we are putting forward for AAC NOAA. And then obviously getting into downloadable, downscaled data for each region or each locality is one maybe for long-term consideration. I think that's pretty much all I have. So I'll stop here to see if I have any questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Mustafa. Why don't we open it up? I'd like to use about 5. We can do maybe 5 to 8 minutes of discussion for both of these. So, just raise your hand or get my attention and we'll just kind of dive into this. I'm seeing some threads that I'll mention kind of toward the end, but I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions for either group of authors. Or would you like to start? Okay, well then I'm gonna go to a question. Oh, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know whether to wait till the end. We got a lot of things to ask. I think most of it is not, it's just listening to all this. My only concern or hope is that we get everybody connected to the latest information that's out there being done by other groups, and using the latest tools, like the interagency tool that from NASA is the IPCC, but in the US, we're using the interagency scenarios, and that's not in that tool. There's a different, anyway, the sea level calculator that the Corps has been taken over by the SLAT tool that was already presented. And we also have our own, NOAA has a sea level calculator too, with all that and access to all the APIs. So I just want to make sure that we're using the same information. And also there's work that the highway, I put it in the chat there. Basically the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, they had a guidance document and it was put out in 2009. 2019, Roger Kilgore. It was a group revising that, and actually Dewberry got the contract to sea level science and gives you an upper and lower range that they're using. And I assume engineers are going to be using that. And so I'm worried it's not going to be consistent with what goes into ASCE. So I want to make sure that everybody's looking at the same information. And it's not out, it's a draft. And I think I can connect folks with where that is before that comes out. But otherwise, it's going to be confusing.
No, I totally agree, Doug. And that was, you kind of asked the question that I was going to get to, which is, I've been playing with this now for quite some time, 15 years. For those of you that don't know, I was at OST, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, back almost 20 years ago now. And the competition between programs across the federal space to advocate for their own products is getting in our way. Okay. And so I think that's where ASCE can be very helpful here, because, we can be clearer about how, well, we need to understand these different tools. We need to understand why are they consistent? Are they not consistent? Which is the best fit for practice in terms of engineering design from an ASCE perspective. Okay. And I think that's where I kind of see some of this conversation going. Because I don't know the difference between these. I don't know why one ASCE committee would choose one product over another. I don't have that. I don't have the vision into that. But I think these discussions are really beginning to highlight how we're creating problems for the people we're trying to help, because we're giving conflicting information. And it's not intended to be conflicting. It's just the nature of everybody working in their own lanes. So that's one of the things that the task force is really trying to address. Jada,
if I may comment on this,
sure, Mustafa,
here.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. Both comments from you and Doug are the ones that we are facing in our work process. We started working on this in 2012, right? In the last 14 years, there's been a stream of changes coming in. And we need to stop at some point, and where we stop to get this into a wrap so we can come up with some product. And by the time we do it and we are ready to send it out, we see that it's already outdated and the new tools are coming in. And sometimes it is, as you said, it is hard to keep track of what's going on with the federal agencies and how they are, advocating for certain tools. So this is one of our recommendations as well, to have a place where everything is synthesized. And maybe with the recommendations, go and use this one. And that might change over time. That's okay. But at least we have one place where a portal where you can see what's going on. And that AAC could take this up, or NOAA could host it as well. Yeah.
All right, no, that sounds good. And I'm going to come back to, I know, Jada, you got your hand up. I appreciate your patience. But I know Billy Sweet, Sweet et al., the 2022 interagency process, there is a process. And so I think we've got to kind of figure out, like, how do we tap into that? How do we provide more fidelity across these different products? If there's a valid reason why one product is better fit for purpose for a particular use case, that's fine. But I think it's more like what connections already exist, and that's what people tend to use. But Billy, if you want to react to that, because I know the interagency process probably as well or better than anybody on the call. And then Jada, I'm going to come back to you. Okay?
Yeah, well, I guess the one thing I would say is, in the process of developing what we do want sort of that two-way co-production. So I think taking some feedback from ASCE in particular of some of these things that have been listed, Mustafa, you had a nice list, some of which may already be included, some of which could be, better articulated. So I guess I would just say, yeah, Dan, we do have, for those that aren't familiar, we do have an interagency group that are developing, what we consider, a combined effort in developing the sea level and extreme sea level information, hopefully at scales that are useful for design, but definitely want to keep the clarification two-way to hope to develop and deliver the types of information that's needed, because we consider you all probably one of the best user groups because you're national and you sort of represent municipalities all over the place.
All right, thanks, Billy. All right, Jada, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
No problem, Dan. I'm so glad that actually we are having this discussion for the sea level rise, because sea level rise, with all this confusion and the different products, is one of the things that we have much higher consensus in compared to the other variables. The things will get even worse when we are talking about the tools, national tools for the extreme precipitation and also the compound flooding. So I think the general message that we should all be trying to do is that the sea level is changing, and is changing towards the right one direction. I think that as long as the consistent message is carried over, it is perfectly fine to have different tools for different purposes. We should not be really using too much of a different data sets. And the reason that we have different data sets, different scenarios than the NOAA is for a good reason, is because we are doing engineering applications. And in engineering applications, by nature of it, need a little bit more stable periods that were active than the NOAA's current rate for updating them. This is why, I mean, our updates are much slower than the NOAA's updates, because NOAA is doing their job by updating the data with the most recent and the most reliable data. They're doing whatever they are doing. So the engineering agencies, engineering organizations need to do their part and update this curves like we are doing it with appropriate intervals. So what I'm trying to say is that, and I can talk about it more, there's a reason that we have different set of curves, and that's not really a deficiency of the system. That should be okay, and we should try to learn to live with this kind of a variability, because again, things will get worse when we are dealing with the compound flooding and the extreme precipitation. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks, Jada. Doug?
Yeah, just a couple things. I think put it in the chat too, but yeah, I mean the curves, the projections are going to continue to change. You know, next NCA process, next AR7, and they're going to change. So, but the task force has made a commitment to whatever the newest adopted projections are. They're included in the different existing tools. Now there was an idea of trying to get all together and make one tool for all the agencies, but for the most part, I'd say regardless of what tool, it's the same information, the same projections are in there. They're not going to be different. And I think we could take that worry away. Now, whether you use IPCC or the interagency scenarios, that's a whole other question. It's probably something you can ask Billy about. The thing I would also recommend, based on one of the needs, or just want to let you guys know, is that co-ops is getting ready to change their sea level trend product to show more acceleration. They're going to start the trend in 1992, the midpoint of the current epoch that we're on, to present. So you can still get the entire period of record, but they're going to base the trend starting in 1992, and that's going to be coming out within the year, just so you guys know that. And they're going to update their API as well. We're going to pull that into our tools as soon as they do it. And the other thing to mention is with the vertical datum stuff you guys were talking about, is that, you know, obviously NGS is getting ready to put out a new NAT 83 and a vertical datum with that, and then we're going to be updating the national tidal datum epic, but that's not going to happen until 2029, where the NTEDE is going to come out. But there's a commitment from NOAA that the VDatum tool that is used is going to incorporate all of the conversion factors needed to go from the old to the new NTDE, and then the relationship with the new vertical datum too.
All right. Thanks, Doug. All right. Other questions, observations? I think that was good. I appreciated a little bit of the clarification there. Other questions or comments? Otherwise, I think Bilal and I are going to try to pull some threads together here. All right, good. Bilal, I don't know. I know you've been giving this some thought. I'm just going to offer a couple observations, and then I'm going to let you kind of pull it all together, which you do so well. First of all, I still have questions about, like, do we understand the interagency process well enough to know that if NOAA sees a need to support ASCE, that interagency process can ensure that the USGS, the Army Corps, et cetera, are adequately in the know, that we can NOAA isn't by design going to do everything we need. But when we originally started this process, there still existed a U.S. Global Change Research Program. And at that time, NOAA chaired the U.S. Global Change Research Program. So our assumption was that if we went to NOAA and NOAA understood our needs, NOAA could help us work with the other agencies to fill in the gaps that go beyond NOAA's mission. I guess my question is, and there may not be an answer, but is that still a valid assumption? Because I think that's going to be really important here. So, I don't know, Amanda, Billy, you guys work closer to this than the rest of us. Is that, do we feel like we can bring the right agency programs together when we need to?
I mean, one thing that I'll say right now is the federal government is a little spread thin, given many, many staff departures. So I'm looking at how can we do what we can right now with who we have to try and get you the best possible thing. And what I saw consistently across this was NOAA, Army Corps, NOAA, Army Corps, NOAA, Army Corps, NOAA, Army Corps, FEMA, FEMA, NOAA, Army Corps, right? So it's like, if those are the three agencies that need to spend the most time talking, then we can start there and figure out if there's anything we can do with who we have. Longer term, we find a lot of value in interagency processes, but sometimes if we add in 20 different agencies, we get buried in the weight of the interagency process. So I would just add to Dan's point is like, if there's a focus on these would be the 2 or 3 or whatever agencies that would get together on these 2 or 3 things, and this would make the biggest impact. Yeah, I mean, USGS is always in the back of my head, right? But they only showed up once on the slides from what I was tallying. So it's kind of like, where can we do the most with what we have right now? So that would be the piece that would be helpful. Like, what's the biggest bang for our buck with what we can do now? I think.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, I'm just going to riff on that for a minute, and then I'm going to go to Rolf. What I have found in my 30 plus years working with agencies across a pretty wide space is, if we can narrow the use case to some specific things that ASCE needs, then that becomes the focusing mechanism rather than the interagency process, which is really a bunch of peers trying to establish priorities that have budget implications. So I think the interagency process can help us, but I think ASCE could actually promote a more unified approach by being the focusing mechanism. So that's why I keep going back to the ASCE standards and manuals of practice. If we can make progress in some of these key standards and manuals of practice, I think that will have a ripple effect. Rolf.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my career doing interagency collaboration. I was the Corps' liaison with USGS. And I think that I agree with you, Dan. I think ASC could focus its resources on trying to get the agencies to work together. And a lot of, a nonpartisan agency has some pull, like the Western Governors Association, the Western States Water Council pushed to get NIDIS, which covers drought, a single website for drought. Maybe it's a goal is to get a website for coastal inundation. And I guess they have a lot of pull, political pull, probably more pull than the ASCE, but maybe it's something our senior leaders at ASCE should consider. But yeah, I think there's a lot of resistance among the agencies if it's not budgeted for an agency, and it depends a lot on senior leaders at each agency. So.
Yeah, no, well stated, Rolf. All right, we got a couple minutes. Bilal, do you have some final thought?
I think it's in line with your comment, Dan, Rolf, and Amanda. I think I could see ASC playing a critical role if I considered, for example, sea level rise. If each agency has its own tool and so on, and there is an element of ownership to each tool and so on, and everybody is interested in in the public good. But I think ASC as a convener will become the place where the debate and the discussion is done for basically meeting the needs of the user. I mean, I see tremendous value. I could see that for every variable that we are dealing with, and we are not looking at a long list in here. I think certainly NOAA is in strategic partnership with ASC, but engaging the Army Corps and FEMA, and which we have been doing that to some extent, will be very wise. So I could see out of this focus groups that we have, such as this one, if there are the specifics, and I took notes, and we don't have the time to go through them, but I think if we take those, then they will become the focus for as a convener. We will end up the next step is to identify the data sets in those agencies and the tools that will become cited in the manuals of practice and the standards, and eventually maybe making their way to the ASC hazards tool. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I got Weiji and then Billy.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, Weisha. And one thing regarding compound flooding, that FEMA is also working on guidance document development on compound flooding. I just wondered whether, Matt, your group is also coordinating with FEMA regarding interagency coordination.
I don't know, Rolf. I think that was you were talking which compound flooding manual? You're talking about the compound flooding manual Rolf briefed?
I saw as a Matt, your Rolf, sorry, wrong person. So just bring that up regarding interagency coordination so that it help provide some consistency or at least collaborating on that.
Yeah, I think FEMA obviously is really key here. FEMA has been involved with ASCE through, especially through ASCE 7. So, and I just as a side note, I just had a phone call from John Ingargiola, who has been deeply involved in a lot of this flood risk work. He's kind of coming up for air, and will be starting to join us on the task force calls again. So I think that's a good sign. Billy, you have the last word.
Well, I definitely do think there's room for ACE to be more of a convener, and mention the Western State Alliance, Governors Alliance, is really we don't really have a mandate at NOAA to produce sea level rise information. I mean, we do in terms of updating our datums, but it's sort of a coalition of the willing. We have an interagency work group. We get DoD funding for a certain project that can involve a few folks, but there really isn't a mechanism, a coordinated, official group in NOAA that produces this. I mean, we do a good job. We work, Doug Marsh and I work in different offices, but we work together. But it really might be an opportunity to voice the needs of a major national organization like ACE that could then provide the impetus, perhaps, at NOAA to assemble. Or at least at NOAA in the interagency space, even better. I know with rainfall, it was called out in some of the other funding bills that came out. The Atlas 15 should be funded. This needs to be maintained. Sea level, it's not really there. So if it's a need, I would say voice it at the very highest level so that maybe we could assemble accordingly and have a catalyst to do so.
No, that's very good, Billy. All right, thanks everybody. It's been a great discussion. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I know one of the things we're going to be talking about is how does the task force promote these kinds of discussions? And of course, ASCE, we've got several ASCE activities that could probably stand to share some information. So I think this is a good topic. We will be in touch, but I thank you all so much for all of your time, and we will be in touch.